Good evening, and welcome to DTV, the Democratic voice on community television here in East Tennessee. My name is Bryan Goldberg, and I am active in the Knox County Democratic Party and in recent electoral campaigns here in the Knoxville area. Tonight, we get an insider's take on what happened in the just concluded General Assembly that adjourned this past Wednesday. We have two outstanding people to help us do that. Representative Mike Stewart from the 52nd House District in Nashville and Representative Rick Staples from the 15th House District right here in Knoxville. Welcome, Mike and Rick. Gentlemen, I'd like to start by asking each of you what stands out as the legislature's #1 accomplishment this past season. And as a senior statesman, Mike, let's start with you.
I think the #1 accomplishment, aside from killing school vouchers, which is always the #1 accomplishment of any legislature in Tennessee, is that we restored the veterans benefits that the Republican supermajority took away in 2015. In 2015, the Republicans, and it was a partisan issue, took away benefits for our 100% disabled veterans. Tennessee, of course, has always had a lot of participants in the military, a lot of veterans in this state, and we've had a bunch of veterans from other states move here. So those veterans benefits are really critical. These were benefits for our 100% disabled veterans, and for reasons that never made any sense, the Republicans stripped those away in 2015, and I've been trying to get them back ever since, as have the Democrats generally. Finally, this year, we put those veterans benefits back. I think that's the best thing we did this year. Should never have been a problem in the first place, but at least we corrected that error.
Rick, what's your take?
Bryan, two things. One, I want the people at home to understand that you're even more handsome in person. Number two, nobody's ever called me outstanding, so thank you for that great introduction. I think one of the things that really surprised me and helped me and kind of drove me along this year was the organic love and dependence people had for the Democratic Party. They were really depending on us to do the right thing. Every single Monday night, we had crowds of people talking about human rights issues and respect for women's bodies, transgender issues, respecting people's rights to raise their children and marry who they choose. And every Monday night, that crowd would be out there cheering us on and leaning on us to go into that chamber and push and vote and fight for them. And that was so encouraging just to be able to touch those individuals, because we might not be the closest government to the people, but people expect us to do the right thing at the state level. I think that our caucus chair, Mike Stewart, I'm not just saying this because he's sitting here, did an excellent job bringing issues to us to make us aware of what we were looking at. I really appreciate how our leader, Craig Fitzhugh, really fought through a lot of things when it was difficult for us. They like to call us the minority, but I think it was a couple of times this year, Mike can touch on it more, where we proved that we probably may have been the minority, but we had the most might. We made a real difference in killing some bad bills and bringing some really good legislation forward, and that always is a reflection of the leadership we have. So I was fortunate enough as a freshman legislator to have a healthy relationship with both my leaders as they helped me along, and it was a great year for us, and we got a lot done.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, you hate to tally things up from a negative standpoint, but there have been a lot of bad ideas bouncing around the legislature for a long time, and unfortunately it's our first duty every year to push them back. And so I mentioned school vouchers, which have now died 5 times. And you'd say, well, they're a terrible idea. They're proven to be bad. But that doesn't stop the current Republican majority from doing all sorts of stuff. But in this case, you have a growing and strengthening coalition against that bad policy. But, you know, in Tennessee, there's no bathroom bill. We've killed it twice. It was such a disaster for North Carolina, and there the Democrats have led the charge. In Tennessee, you know, last day of the session, there was an effort by Republicans through a sneaky conference committee report with the very last bill of the session to slide in legislation that would have essentially doubled the amount of money Republicans could raise from lobbyists. And that was killed on the floor with every Democrat voting against and a handful of Republicans in the last 10 minutes of the legislature. So I think we passed a lot of great bills too. I mentioned the veterans benefits, and that was restoring those was very important. But for the people of Tennessee in terms of their daily lives, honestly, I think what Democrats did most is kill these really, really bad bills which represent such bad ideas, and we've done it over and over again, and I think we're going to continue to have success with that.
Well, fantastic. Sounds like there was a lot of good milestones and a lot of positive energy coming out of the session. Let me ask you this. In recent sessions past, many of Governor Haslam's signature requests have been met by stiff resistance from his own party. What role did you guys and the House Democrats play in helping move forward some of his key signature issues this session?
Mike, you want to touch on that? I thought I did one or two things, but I probably was like a small child running around asking, is this a good idea to be able to do? Yeah. But once again, I have to go to, and I could mention some things about myself, but I don't want to deflect from the fact that it takes good, consistent leadership to keep you encouraged to fight forward. We never broke message. We stood strong. We did a lot of good things to protect the middle class, working class men and women, and respected human rights. But it really came from Craig Fitzhugh, Mike Stewart being consistent, getting legislation in front of us that was to protect our constituents. And so I want Mike to touch on that because they were very consistent, never wavered, and it helps us fight right there in the foxhole because of the leadership we have. Mike, you want to?
Well, and I think, you know, one significant bill that Governor Haslam pushed, of course, was the Improve Act, which involved an increase in gas taxes, a decrease in sales taxes, and some other things. And, you know, I happen to know Representative Staples is a good politician, so he's passing credit on to other people. But one of the very last conversations that was had about that bill was between Representative Staples and the governor's folks. Hope you don't mind me mentioning it, where he forcefully pointed out that while the bill was a lot better than the Republican alternative, there needed to be more progressiveness, more for your regular person raising a family in this state. And ultimately, although he did not come as far as we wanted, Governor Haslam did significantly increase or decrease the sales tax. He increased the amount of savings people were going to get on sales tax on food, and made some other revisions that helped Democrats come around to supporting him. I'll tell you, you know, the thing we faced there was the alternative plan. You had Governor Haslam, and he was pushing the Improve Act, and that involved a significant sales tax decrease and, you know, these other aspects. You then had what was called the Hawk Plan, and it was a plan put together by a number of Republicans. A lot of them are good people, but they have very different ideas about how government should be run. And what the Hawk Plan would have done is it would have stripped away our existing revenues from sales taxes and used that to pay for the roads. So ultimately what that would have done, it would have undermined our sales tax base and made it very difficult to fund all of our government services. You know, if you're the Koch brothers out in Wichita and you don't believe in government and you want to run government into the ground, well, that's a really good mechanism for doing that. But if you think government is important, if you think that roads are important and hospitals are important and training doctors are important and all the things the government can do, the Hawk Plan was a complete non-starter. It would have been a disaster for everything the Democrats believe in. So ultimately, the Democrats, after a lot of discussion and negotiation, lined up to help the governor pass his signature legislation. There's no question, and no one in Nashville would dispute this, there's no question it could not have been done without the support of the Democrats on the floor. And the fact is, what you saw this year is pretty much every piece of legislation required or in every instance in which the governor was passing major legislation, his budget, his Administrative Procedures Act, which passes all the rules that are determined, and his Improve Act, probably the three major pieces of legislation that passed this year with the administration pushing it. In each instance, the Democrats controlled the vote. So the governor found out he couldn't pass his signature bill without the Democrats. He found out he couldn't pass his budget without the Democrats. And he found out he couldn't get his Administrative Procedures Act through when we blocked it. And we blocked it because we felt at the time he wasn't doing enough to give progressive benefits again to just your regular Tennessee voter. So I think what you're going to see from Democrats over and over again, I mean, we're willing to cooperate with the governor when he's willing to reach out and work to meet our goals, you know, expanded health care, better schools, public schools, not privatized schools, when he's willing to not outsource and to use public employees where they've done a good job for years and years, we'll cooperate with the governor. But what he saw with his budget is, if he tries to pass something and we don't think it's appropriate, we're going to try to block it. And what he saw this year is we have the power to do so when we ally with other folks.
Right. So in years past, there's been talk of the supermajority that the Republicans hold, and the fact that you guys could possibly just not show up and business would go on. But what I'm hearing from you two is that you guys are bringing common sense ideas and things that would benefit a lot of people, and there's at least a portion of the other side that is hearing that, maybe from the governor's office, and then your colleagues in the House that are willing to listen to you, and you're affecting change in legislation as it moves forward.
At the state level, we're checked in. Our legislation that we've fought to pass had purpose to serve working class men and women. The legislation that we fought against was going against working class men and women. Americans, Tennesseans, sit down every day at their lunch break figuring out how they're going to pay their bills. Maybe when they get home at dinner, they're talking about what they need just to get this fixed, how they're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. All they want from their elected officials is to do the right thing by them. Nationally and even locally and at the state level, people want to know where the Democratic Party is. Well, I can tell you at your state level, and it's been proven by this year, we're checked in and we're fighting. We're here, we understand what the concerns are. We're listening to your concerns. We're at the street level and we're right here in the fight. From January to May, we fought. We never gave up. We never cowered to the number that we had. And we showed the number that we had was enough to keep the fight going. And so when you look out and you wonder where your help is coming from, who's going to be there fighting with you, I'm telling you, the Democratic Party is alive, is doing well in the state of Tennessee, and we're not scared of a fight, and we will continue to fight for you. So know and have confidence that your state legislators, the Democratic Party, understands we care, we listen, and we will be here for the people. And that's the bottom line. And I think this was a great year to show and prove that.
Yeah. You both of you have touched on the fact that the Democratic Party fights for the working class people of Tennessee. And Mike, you touched on this earlier, but in my opinion, a great example of not fighting for the everyday Tennessean happened in, as you mentioned, the 11th hour of this year's session, where Republicans tried to jam through legislation that would have vastly increased the impact of big money in future elections. Can you touch on that a little bit and why you think that was even brought up by the Republican side?
I mean, it was brought up because, the Republicans are about accumulating power for themselves and for the people that they're focused on, which today, as with 50 years ago, are your wealthiest and most powerful citizens. And the fact is, at the last minute, in a conference committee for everyone watching, is a committee that's formed when the Senate and House have two different bills. So you just get people together in a room and they file what's called a report, and that is the final bill. And in Washington and also here in Tennessee, the conference committees are a place where a lot of mischief can be done, because at the last minute, after the whole year of legislating, an entirely new bill can leap out of a conference committee. That's what happened this year. We had a very limited bill that had nothing to do with increasing fundraising levels, and all of a sudden tacked onto that by really some Republican senators was a plan to virtually double the amount of money that PACs could give during a particular cycle. Well, that's not something that has been debated this year. That's not something that people have asked for. That's something that some particular politicians wanted to foist upon Tennesseans at the last minute. If we're going to do something like that, it's a terrible idea. I don't think there are 6 voters in the entire state that think one big problem is we don't have enough corporate money in politics. And so, this was attempted. It was a sneaky deal at the very end of the day, literally on the last day of the session. And I'll say, luckily, as you pointed out, you had all the Democrats, of course, vote against it, and you had a large number of Republicans say, that's just not shrewd, that's not wise, and most of all, that's not the way the people's business is supposed to be done. I think a lot of the Republicans that voted against that just recognized if it's a good idea, this is not, then it should be able to survive the normal process where the public has time to engage. We don't need to be doing anything by sneaky deal. That's not the way to move our government forward, whether it's controlled by Republicans or Democrats. So, I mean, we blocked that legislation. Every single Republican on that conference committee was for those increased levels of fundraising, the increased levels for corporate money, and I think it's fair to say the Democrats blocked that. That was the final day. For Democrats out there, as Representative Staples said, you know, you're not stupid. You know the Democrats are in the minority in Tennessee, so we don't have absolute power and can't just pass whatever bills we want. But make no mistake, the people that came up and came every Monday night to cheer us on and to participate in the process can tell you that every week the Democrats are dramatically affecting change, typically blocking really bad ideas, sometimes enacting really good ones. Representative Staples, if at some point he doesn't talk about some of the good bills he passed this year, I'm going to force him to, but hopefully that'll come up further. Anyway.
Well, I have two final questions, and I'd like each one of you to expound upon them, and then one leads into the other. Let's imagine a world where the Democrats now hold the majority in the House. If that happens, what kind of proposals would you guys both like to see if Far Side was in control? What kind of proposals would you guys like to see pushed forward?
I'll do the first one, you do the second one. I'll take the easy one. The number one thing we'd do first is we would expand health care,
right,
just like they've done in Kentucky, to the 250,000 to 300,000 people in Tennessee that don't have health care right now, today. Most of the country has already expanded health care, as authorized by the Affordable Care Act. Not doing so is just taking Tennessee's money, Tennessee's tax dollars, sending them up to Washington, and then giving them out to people in California and New York. You know, they're the ones getting the expanded health care. Our taxpayers are paying for it. It's completely ridiculous and inexcusable. Now, to his credit, Governor Haslam has tried to expand health care. He's not been successful. He's been blocked by the Republicans in the legislature. You know, our joke is it's very hard to find somebody who's not for expanded health care that isn't actually a sitting Republican member of the Tennessee General Assembly. It's the worst policy we've got going in Tennessee, and that would be done one day after the election of a Democratic majority.
Of course, Mike was right on, Leader Stewart, because I was going to say health care. And
I wanted to grab that easy one first so I could get it.
It's true. We have so many Tennesseans, 300-some-odd thousand, who are without health care. We're losing money. People are dying. We all represent 60-some-odd thousand people, and how you can go back to your district and look at people that are sick and know that within your district possibly hospitals are closing. People aren't receiving health care because of your blocking something that we need. How can you call yourself a leader, an elected official, and just watch that deterioration of human life and not want to do something about it? And speaking of that, one thing I would like to, that we're currently not doing, but Democrats really push for, is caring for our young people. Currently, young people are taking the lives of one another at an alarming rate across the state of Tennessee. If they're not committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide, we have a real epidemic with young people not appreciating their lives and not understanding their value. And usually, children realize they're valuable based on the investment that you give them. Unfortunately, what we do, we've cut programming, funding that helps our young people. We've cut assistance to schools that deal with inner city or poor children, and they don't see the value around them. There's no development, there's no job training, there's no job growth, and how we can just look at our babies who are our future, constantly pick up the paper and see from Memphis to Cosby County, young people, black and white, losing their lives every day, either by opioid abuse, violent acts, or suicide. I would like to see some funding to go back in to help those programs that are established that deal with at-risk youth, go away from privatization for our juvenile system that helps get our young people back on track. So I know one thing I would do if we were in a majority is take back the mantle of fighting for our young people and our future. Also, I would also like to see us treat our elderly better. Once again, that ties back into health care, but also they need better transportation. Hopefully the Improve Act may assist with that. But programming that, like Meals on Wheels, are threatening to be cut at the national level. Sometimes that's the only meal, the only hot meal our elderly get. So I believe this more so than anything. The Democratic Party has always been good about taking care of our young people and taking care of our elderly, and we catch everybody else in the middle. We've kind of gotten away from that. All we care about right now is those corporate dollars and the corporate people, and that's not good. That's not good business. That's not a way to take care of taxpayers' dollars. So just briefly saying that, I'd like to see us get back to that.
You know, in another area, I think, where you could see, and it keys off of what Representative Staples said. I mean, he was talking about the young and how we could do a lot more to invest in our Tennessee young people. And, of course, the dividends from that would last for a generation, you know. And we have so many opportunities. We have millions of dollars in our surplus accounts, and we're missing a whole lot of opportunities. I'll give you an example. If you pick through the Haslam administration budget, you can occasionally find a little tidbit here or there to deal with the opioid crisis. This is the #1 health crisis in the state of Tennessee. It kills more people every year than car wrecks. And that's not just a problem that's always existed we can't do anything about. In 1994, opioids caused about 400 overdose deaths. That's about 1,500 a year now. And for every death, there's a sea of terrible consequences for our society, for our towns and cities. Point being, we're really not doing much about that. We had a task force. Some Democrats were on it. They did a good job. But the point is, we need radical, expensive, comprehensive responses to that crisis. And I think if Democrats took over, you would see a dramatic change in how we address that crisis, from little bitty here and there things to systematic approach to the problem. And I'll give you an example, to much more expanded crisis management and recovery options for people who get into that nightmarish situation. So before, the person who got injured on the job and becomes an opioid addict loses his entire family, and the entire family is thrown onto onto our state services, we could intervene and get that family back on track before an opioid addict destroys his entire family. We're just not doing that in any systematic way right now, and we need to respond to that crisis in a much more effective way than we're doing under the current administration.
Sure, sure. Well, my follow-up question to that is, I think, one that's on a lot of people's minds this year after the national election, and the question is, how do we get back to that majority, right? What are the steps that both of you guys feel that everybody watching this show can take or needs to take in order for us to get more elected officials so that the Democrats have a larger seat and hopefully one day take back the majority?
Well, finding good candidates, first of all, that will be committed to what being a state legislator is. It's not your local city council or county commission. It's a different world up there, and somebody can handle that has thick skin and is willing to work 14 to 16-hour days. But we need to refocus back on white middle class, the African American community, and get the working class back. Oftentimes you may hear people make comments, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. And so we have to recapture those individuals. Hopefully the body of work that we've put together with consistency shows that we're here, we're fighting to build the party back up so that we never have the travesty again that we have at the national level, and we'll never be in a position again where we have over 300,000 people without health care.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I really think people, these political change takes time, but I do think you're seeing a lot of people, if you look at polls, looking at the Republican Party now and asking, am I really getting what I was sold? And look at the national level, but it's kind of representative of what's going on in Tennessee. you know, at the national level, President Trump was elected telling people, look, all you small towns where you don't have any jobs, I'm going to really look out for you. I'm going to drain the swamp. Drain the swamp, I mean, the guy's got more Goldman Sachs executives in his administration than Goldman Sachs has in Goldman Sachs. You know, the guy, Gary Cohn, that he's hired to run the economy was the '2 man at Goldman Sachs when Goldman Sachs was involved in the financial crisis, when Goldman Sachs took $8 billion from AIG, which was essentially our government's, the people's money, because AIG was already bankrupt. So that's, I mean, he might be the least qualified person in the United States to run the economy, and that's the guy that President Trump picked. Now, maybe President Trump's changed his mind about how you run things, but the point is, his actions are totally the opposite of what he told the American people. And if you look at the supermajority in Tennessee, I mean, every day, not a day goes by that they are not increasing some interest rate that people have to pay, that they are not doing something that damages some state employee's pension, some state employee's job, that they're not doing something that it makes it easier for somebody to pollute the environment, and more specifically to pollute the environment right next to your house or farm or neighborhood. And so I think over time, sure, people don't immediately wake up and switch parties. You know, we know in Tennessee we've got some pretty well-entrenched traditions about who votes for what. Yeah. But I think the fact of the matter is the Republicans are so consistently at the state and national level saying one thing and doing the direct opposite. You know, you can do that for a while because people are good people and they take you at your word. But I think in another year of the Trump administration, people are going to look around and say, I thought that administration was going to be about change. I thought it was going to be about draining the swamp. I didn't think it was going to be about reducing regulations on our largest banks. I didn't think it was going to be about hiring a Secretary of Education who's essentially fundamentally opposed to public school teachers as a concept. You know, I know some public school teachers that chose to vote for Trump. You know, they're scratching their heads wondering how they could have made such a terrible mistake. Honestly, if there's a public school teacher in the state of Tennessee voting for Republicans for the state legislature, I'd like to ask them what it is they're voting for, because the Republicans have engaged in a nonstop, continuous war against public education since the day they gained the majority. It's going to take time for people to realize what's happening. When they do, I think very quickly you'll see they'll abandon the current group of Republicans that is carrying that mantle, that name.
There's definitely probably a lot of buyer's remorse there on the national level.
I would like to think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I'd say that to both of your credits, the vision that you guys laid out a couple of minutes ago is one that I think the average working class family can buy into, because it would directly affect their lives in a positive way. And you're talking about investing from the ground up, hopefully getting a return on that investment, whether it be education or families in need, versus the current idea, which would be let's cut something from the top and sit around and wait, which doesn't seem to have been working out. So finally, just real quickly, we've got less than a minute left. What's the average person do to help you guys? You've mentioned real quickly.
Well, one is please stay in communication with your state legislator. Let them know what's going on at the local level. Communication is key. Stay focused, stay abreast. Don't fall for the smoke and mirrors. Keep reading. Look at what we're putting out so you know what we're doing, what we're fighting about. And whatever you do, do not watch Fox News. They're brainwashing you.
Final thing
we're going to
is,
have to stop right there. We've run out of time. Guys, it's been a great discussion, but regrettably, we are out of time. Thank you guys for sharing with us the behind-the-scenes things that went on over in Nashville this year. And everybody out there, be sure to check into DVT next week for a really interesting show featuring Mother's Mission Against Violence. Thank you and have a great weekend.